All right, guys, welcome into another episode of the Nonstop Families Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Bell, for the week, and I'm here pretty much all the time. So I'm your only host at the moment. So we'll see what happens in the future. But as of right now, hey, you've got me. Joining me today, let me tell you how excited I am for this because I've known these guys. We go way back, like mid-pandemic, all right? And we've got to know each other through podcasts, through the Mad Pastors podcast is kind of how it got started. I'm gonna let you guys talk all about that here in a second. Eventually going into the podcast called The T, which we'll talk about here more in a little bit. But I want everybody to make welcome today Mr. Ian Dunaway, who we have had on the show before, and Mr. John Oliver. Guys, thanks for being here, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yes, indeed. Hey, I want to clarify something really quick before we get started because all three of us have been involved in student ministry. I'm curious as to collectively how many years of student ministry experience we all have together. All right, I finished up 18 years of full-time student ministry. So what about you two?
I'm in year 11.
You're in year 11, so that puts us up to 29. Ian?
A little over, between 15 and 16. So let's just say 15.
Let's say 15. Yeah. So I just want every parent knowing who's watching this right now, you've got over 40 years of youth ministry, student ministry experience in the Zoom room right now. Okay. So look at that, guys. Look how that goes.
And we've got opinions about everything from the 80s to today.
Our ministry experience is old enough to have a graduate. That's how old we are.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Fair enough.
My goodness. Well, guys, hey, again, I appreciate y'all being here, man. I've loved the opportunities we've got to hang out together, and I'm excited for what we get to talk about today because we're actually going to revisit a topic that we used on your all's podcast. But before we get to that, I'm going to let you guys take a little bit of time and introduce yourself to our people. Ian, if they've listened to our podcast in the past, they know a lot about you. But I want you to go ahead and fill us in on maybe what's new, what's going on. Remind our people of your ministry and how they can get in contact with you real quick.
Yeah. So I do several things. I'm a local teaching pastor at a church plant in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area. And so there's that. I'm what's called the director of ministry development at a group called G6 Allies, which is tied to that church plant. And we literally exist to do nothing but support pastors and their families and church leaders. And so whether it's, I spend all my time finding all the problems that I've experienced in 15 years and other guys experience, and then trying to create tools to help that. Other than and being as brief as I can, other than, the T, we do the T podcast, which has been on a couple month break as we're getting ready to jump into season 2 on that. And man, it's been cool to watch. I think John told me there was almost 3,000 downloads. So that's been
awesome.
Good for us. The Mad Pastors podcast is on YouTube. We have a G6 Allies YouTube channel. And so, but all of that to say, I do everything from, John and I even partner with this, that I preach and speak at events and D-Nows. I've trained nationally for doing student ministry and stuff like that. I mean, I love watching any age, of believer, impacted by God's word. But I think as a student pastor, that stink is just always on you as a guy that loves students.
That's a good way to put it.
But I love watching students engage with God's word and seeing them literally changed. And so that's my nickel's worth. You can find me on g6allies.com, g6church.com. And if you find me on any other media platform, it's always Dunaway. It's just DUNAWHO. So
you do. And you guys actually, before John gets in here, you guys actually have an event coming up that you're partnering together. I think Ian's coming to speak for you, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I'm excited because John and I got to know each other because he's in LaGrange, Georgia, and not to spoiler alert, but I was in Noonan about 20 minutes away from him, and we met probably 7 or 8 years ago. And so I remember all the D-Nows he and his churches used to put on, and they do community stuff, and pretty honored to get to speak in February at that. So thanks for trusting me, John. I do expect a bigger trailer than Stephen gave me for this podcast.
We got to stay within budget. All right. All right. Hey, John, man, you're brand new to the Nonstop Families Podcast here, and we're excited to hear from you too, man. So fill us in. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and your ministry.
Yeah, so I am originally from LaGrange, Georgia. Spent life growing up in right outside Chicago, Illinois. Right
What about
outside
them
Baltimore,
Bulldogs, by
Maryland.
the way, man? What about them Bulldogs?
Hey,
Look at that.
what about them? They won for the first time. All of our ministry might be a long time before it happens again.
Maybe. All right.
Any
But I
Alabama
hope-
loss is a win.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, so I right outside Chicago, Illinois, right outside Baltimore, Maryland, moved back to LaGrange, blah, blah, blah. Went to University of Central Florida, played college football down there, UCF, and have been in ministry going on 11 years now. So I have a wife that we have been married for going on 9 years, and we have a 2.5-year-old little girl and a about to be year-old little boy, both of which we adopted.
Awesome.
So we have a huge heart for adoption and love to see families engage in that ministry as they seek to grow their family or seek to support families that do that as well. And we've been just doing ministry at my home church now for 3 years. Is the church that I would say that I grew up in the most, had the most spiritual formation in my time as a student at this church. And so I'm really in a unique position in my life where I'm doing ministry, leading leaders that led me. And so it's been a really unique opportunity and a really unique challenge. And so we're really, we love where we're at in our life right now. I talked to somebody the other day that said, sounds like you guys are in the good old days, and I'm happy to stay here for a little while. So that's my story.
Awesome. And how can people check out your ministry where you're involved at?
So you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, whatever. It's going to always be J Oliver 71 or John Oliver 71 because 71 was my football number. You can expect to see a large amount of tweets about football and ministry. Those are going to be the two things that you see from me and anything Marvel related.
Nice.
You can go to rosemontchurch.org and you can go to our student page and see what we're up to. And then, of course, the Tea podcast that I get to co-host with Ian, where we spill a little bit of tea every week as we're getting ready to launch up. The beauty of the Tea podcast is it's short. So the first season, 38 episodes, 10 minutes long. And then the second season coming up, we're actually going to do the season of the extended brew, and they're going to be about 20 minutes. So still long enough to get you to work in the morning and hopefully give you something to think about during the week.
Good deal. And that leads us right in because we're talking about a topic that you guys actually discussed on season 1 of the Tea podcast, and I had the awesome opportunity to jump in as part of multiple points in that discussion with you guys. And the way it works is that we're talking about the top 10 ways, and this I love the title you guys gave this because it's one of those titles is like, okay, that kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, but I want to know what it's talking about. All right, the top 10 ways to make sure your child hates Jesus and his church. Again, we're a round table here of student ministers, over 40 years of student ministry experience. I'm not saying we're gurus or anything along those lines, but I am saying that over the years we've had a lot of opportunities to minister to families, to minister to parents, and a lot of what we're going to talk about, we've seen this happen. Or know, and just and
Not
it's
a guru, but I moonlight as a swami occasionally.
Oh, do you? Nice.
I'm just or a shawarma, one of the two. I can't remember which one.
I think isn't that a sandwich?
Maybe I moonlight sandwiches. I don't know.
Moonlight is a sandwich. That's great. All right, guys. Well, we're going. Let's get right into it, and I want you guys just to share from your heart, man. Just share what knowledge you have, and we'll kind of toss this back and forth. First of all, let me say this for those of you listening: we are only going to discuss 5 of these top 10 ways. If you want the other 5, you're going to have to go and check out the Tea podcast, which you can find on iTunes and pretty much anywhere they get their podcasts from. Is that right, guys?
Yeah,
that's right.
Look for the logo. There's a lot of teas, so look for the logo of the little coffee mug fighting his way to Jesus.
There you go, man. So yeah, make sure this isn't just a discussion about youth ministry. This is a discussion about families and how important it is that we seek to disciple our kids in every form and fashion. Because too often we as parents, if we're not careful, we can try to push that responsibility onto pastors and student pastors and say, hey, you're the professional, you disciple my kid. But in reality, we as parents have that responsibility. So Here we go, guys. Top 10 ways to make sure your child hates Jesus and his church. Just 5 of these that I've picked out. Number 1, make church optional. All right? Make church optional. Guys, open floor. One of you take it.
I mean, you want me to go? I'm going to go. So
Come on.
Go, man.
Number 1, I say it all the time. You cannot expect your child to prioritize what you marginalize for their entire life. So if you make church optional, you are marginalizing the most important thing in the world to them is this community. Now, we're not talking about a building, right? We're talking about this group of believers that we fellowship with and that we do life with. And Scripture is extremely clear that we should not forsake the gathering together and encouragement and admonition of one another, as is the habit of some. And so making church optional is, in our minds, the number one way to make sure that your child hates Jesus and his church.
And to that point, I think so. I get this post, and it's very, very smart. Sometimes I think people are too smart. I don't know if I've ever had that problem, but I think that there's this intellectual and theological red herring to what John said that's at the point of saying, well, what do you mean by the church attending church? I'm like, well, I mean that if there's a tent on a football field and you're with a group of believers, it's a church. Like, I don't know, however you got to meet. But I think that that's a really easy red herring to pull us away from the point. And before there was deconstruction in church, it was just called owning your own faith and learning what the Bible said, just throwing it out there. We keep repackaging things and then they get more sinister. But when you talk about making church optional, I think that there's a lot of really good sounding bad wisdom. And what I mean by that is over the years, I've heard a lot of parents say things like, they go, well, I don't, I'd see their kid maybe once a month. Usually their kid was kind of a jerk, or they were always struggling with something. Yep. And I'd say, hey, where's John been? I haven't seen him in a while. And how's everything going at home? Well, he doesn't make it every week because we just want him to choose. We want him to choose because we just want him to really own it and be in charge of it. And I said, I say all that hyperbolically, but that was a real conversation. And I would stop and I'd say, okay, so here's what you're telling me. John doesn't get to choose school. He doesn't get to choose eating. What he eats, like eating a healthy meal or whatever you consider that. He doesn't get to choose really football or if he's going to play a sport, but he does get to choose what you think is the most important thing. So what does that communicate to him? And when we would walk through it, it communicates that, well, this isn't really important because I'm not forced to do it. And people would say, well, that just seems mean to force people to do it. Well, then don't let him go to school anymore. Don't give him, don't tell him he doesn't have an option about college. And so what I always grew up understanding, and I don't think I ever really hated church. And that wasn't, and I say that because I wasn't a super spiritual kid. I had parents who just said, it isn't a debate. Sundays and Wednesdays, we're with believers because that's when the church meets. If it had been Saturdays and Thursdays, we'd have been there. And so when you don't really have an option, you may not always enjoy, and my parents would say, you may not always enjoy going, or maybe I always enjoy this, but if God's word is open and you're there, God can teach you. And man, it grew. I mean, I'm a pastor now, not even because I wanted to be until God really called me into it in my early 20s. But I just loved the church because you develop a heart for those things. I don't think a lot of kids love sports as much as that same principle holds true. They see mom and dad love it. They don't get an option, and then they develop a love for it. And I think that is part of Deuteronomy 6, which is what Nonstop Families is based out of. Yeah. That you raise your child in the way they should go. And as you do that, that's not brainwashing. That's not anything else. What it is raising your child to do what they were created to do. And so making church optional lets your kids show. I mean, listen, we've been doing this for 20 years. And look at the last couple of 20, 30, 40 years, the last generations, it becomes less and less because people go, it really wasn't a big deal when I grew up. So why should I go now?
Yeah. Well, and I'll just add this real quick too. I mean, every conversation I've had with parents for the last decade typically heads towards the stuff that their kids are engaging with every day, the world that they're coming to know, and the world that they're in, and it paralyzes parents. I mean, would you guys agree? I mean,
absolutely.
It's paralyzing to them because they're like, this world that they're engaging with and they're coming to know. And I think parents, they really side with making it optional because the parents need to be less concerned with the world that their kids are coming to know, and they need to be more concerned with the church that they're coming to know, because the church that they're coming to know, they can actually have impact on what that looks like. The world is going to be what it is. So let's help them see what the church should be with our involvement, with our engagement, with the way that we're devoting ourselves to the apostles' teaching, to the gathering and the breaking of bread. Let's devote ourselves to that so that the church that our kids are coming to know far exceeds anything in the world that they're coming to know.
Yeah. I think, I mean, you're watching to that point. I mean, you watch so many, I mean, churches always, gathering with the believers is always the afterthought. I mean, I remember teaching this to a college kid who I just had a group of leaders, and I just said, God's going to give you 126 hours in a week, and it's just a gift, and he's going to give you a schedule, but he ain't going to make you be obedient with it. And I said, we've become accustomed to say, I'm just so busy. I don't know if I have time for church. I mean, it amazes me. Have you guys ever noticed it's like, I don't know if it's physics. I don't know if it's something like that, but there's some kind of constant in the universe that every birthday party happens on Sundays and Wednesdays. I don't know, but apparently, and I always laugh, and that's kind of flows a little bit into this optional idea. It's kind of like, if something's got to give, it's going to be here. And I think it's funny. We'll trust God with our eternity and pretend to trust him with all these other things, but we don't care to even trust him with 2 or 3 hours a week of our time. I don't know. It's a weird, I don't know. To me, it seems counterintuitive. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, this this bleeds right into point 2 that you guys made on your show, and this doesn't go in the same order that you guys did, but it's the second point that I want to bring up here. We've already talked about making church optional. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about the top 10 ways to make sure your child hates Jesus and his church from the T with Ian Dunaway and John Oliver. We're only going to hit 5 of these. If you want the rest of them, make sure to go check out the T podcast and look for episodes a few months back on their season 1. They're getting ready for season 2. Point number 2 that I want to bring up, not only make the church optional, but one of the ways to make sure Jesus hates Jesus. So let me say that again. Jesus. One of the ways to make sure Jesus hates your kid.
This needs to be in the final cut.
Yeah, it will be. I don't edit that much detail. All right, I don't have time. One of the ways to make sure your child hates Jesus in the church is to keep Jesus at church. One of the things that I remember reading was that the average church has at maximum probably 50 hours a year to disciple your child. Does discipleship happen at the church? Absolutely, it does. It certainly does. We've had students come through our student ministry who didn't get any discipleship at home, but were able to be discipled by our leadership, and so that certainly does happen. But arguably, that's not the primary place that God intended for it to happen. The church was established in Acts chapter 2. He established the family when Genesis. This is when he established that unit, and so. Talk to me real quick, Ian, if John started this last time, if you want to start on this time, talk to us about how keeping Jesus at church can make our children end up hating Jesus and the church in general.
Yeah, I think so when you leave Jesus at church, and so what we mean by that is the only time that you talk about him is going to be those 50 hours a week. I mean, that's it. And so
50 hours a week, that's more than a full-time job, man.
50 hours, it should be that 50 hours a year. But I think when you look at it and you say, okay, keeping Jesus at church, what I see is it's not even an explicit thing or something parents argue. I've always said that I've started saying that I think that the dirtiest phrase a Christian can utter, you just want to talk, I mean, we talk about 4-letter words, talk about whatever. I think the dirtiest thing you can say is, I know I should, but because that always presupposes that something is more important, but you're refusing to do it for whatever reason. And so when you keep, I mean, I do remember, I don't think parents do things great, but I know growing up with me, I know that when I've invested in students or when I've seen students thrive and become like Christ, that was because Christ was a regular part of the or the day to day in the middle of the week. Yeah. He was a regular part of the conversation. And so, but what I do see a lot is kids just see Jesus is for church, and Jesus is about that. So I'd always have a kid come in and cuss on a Wednesday night, and he'd go, I can't say that, I'm at church. And I look at him and say, I don't care if you say it at church. I said, I just care that you don't say it at church, but you say it everywhere else. So just be consistent and we'll deal with that. And this is always the idea that when we keep Jesus and keep hard topics and keep things like that just for the pastor, we fail. And I think that the reverse principle of this is that you are a disciple. Just in Greek means a learner. It just means somebody who's learning, and you're creating disciples in your home of something. Yeah. I think most of the time it's going to be politics and it's going to be football or whatever sport they pick. And I think John said it very well in a sermon he preached at his church. If your kids know more about your COVID stance than they do about your stance in the gospel, then you have failed. Or something like that. I put a little edge on it, probably. John's nicer than me.
No, that's pretty edgy.
Yeah, there it is.
Pretty edgy.
But all that to say, that in a nutshell, I mean, I don't know if you guys see the same thing, but I think kids will, and when we say hate the church, sometimes it's worse than hate. It's just apathy. And there is no feeling. And I think you have kids that go, well, I mean, Jesus made a difference 2 days a week. And I got really excited at a D Now or at a camp, and I rededicated 85 times, which isn't in the Bible. And I got rebaptized 4 times, which isn't in the Bible. And did all this, but just never worked. I guess Jesus is just for when you're young. And then they move on.
And if I can cut in here, one of the things my pastor tells dads all the time is, if you know more about your favorite colleges or your favorite sports team's quarterback than you know about your daughter's boyfriend, there's a problem.
Ruth. Whoa.
And he says it, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's just true, right? I mean, and he has a whole thing where he has really sweet, godly, beautiful daughters. And he wants to make sure that people are honoring them as they're pursuing them. And so his rule is, and he's established it from when they were little, it's like, I'm going to interview them. They're going to spend time with me before they spend time with you, because I'm going to know more about them than I know about the starting quarterback at Georgia. And I just think, I'm like, dude, yes, because, and that speaks to what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's the idea that you can't just leave Jesus at church, because the kids that, it's the idea that the answer to everything is Jesus in Sunday school.
Right.
Or if it's a Christian artist singing it, well, it must be Chris Tomlin. Or, all of these different things. Like when we just compartmentalize Jesus and say he can only have influence of my life when I'm there, then what have we done with him the rest of the time? Because I guarantee you, if we just leave Jesus at church, when we stand before the judgment seat of God, we're not gonna hear, well done, my good and faithful. We're gonna hear, depart from me, I never knew you.
Man, it's
to me, I see John, and it reminded me of this. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the TikToks where the TikTok trends blow my mind. They're just, some of them are hilarious, some of them are just stupid. But I remember, there's this one where guys will call in to a job they don't have, and then they'll call in sick. So they'll make a joke that they just got hired yesterday, but man, they're just not feeling well. And then it devolves into, but the employer, it's like at a Walmart. And so the shift manager doesn't really know who they are, but keeps talking to them like they're employees. And so they'll go, well, the truth is, I'm not really sick. I just want to go fishing for a week. And she goes, well, you can't do that. You'll be fired. And they get really angry. But I think that, especially with what John's saying and what your pastor said, John, which I think is great. I think that is how discipleship happens when you keep Jesus at church. I think that there is a very confused leader and person who tries to treat somebody, because it develops a spiritual veneer with not very much underneath. And so you can have very spiritual people and you're talking to them like the TikTok person where you're like, no, Jesus wants to change your life. You look really spiritual. I thought that you were a believer. And they're like, yeah, I just want to go fishing for, and it's two different connections here. And so like I saw this happen at a church. It's very true. Seen it happen in a lot of places, but most acutely at a church where it was very traditional. And there was this group of seniors who all the leaders told me, they have been discipled and discipled and discipled. And they, just over and over. And I said, okay, well then what we're going to do, if they are so into Jesus, we're going to do an 8 a.m. Sunday morning for them, where I'm going to buy them breakfast from a restaurant. I'm going to get them their favorite Starbucks drinks. I'm going to pay a lot of money because I had a big budget. I'm going to pay a lot of budget money to invest in these kids to not only reward them for being here, but to let them know how special they are. And then I want them to go serve at the next hour and with other people. And so we show up and we start talking about some basic stuff. And we started talking about some basic stuff with them. And then I asked the question to the pastor's son. So do you guys know what justification? You guys know what justification is, right? And just cricket chirps. And I said, any ideas? And so then we start walking through the basics of the faith. And what I found out was Jesus, it was really good to look like Jesus when they were there, but he had no effect on their day-to-day life after. And so there was this veneer, and it's dangerous. I think it's a whitewashed tomb mentality, but there was this veneer of Jesus that had to be broken down. And once you were there, it was just empty. And I think that's to John's point. We will study a quarterback before we'll study a savior. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I hate that.
Yeah.
Well, because it's easier.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's easier and it's non-confrontational. Mm-hmm. Nothing confronts you like the gospel of Jesus Christ. Absolutely nothing. You cannot engage with it and leave the same way than when you sat down. You just can't do it.